Long ago, in a deep forest, hidden from the eyes of those he feared, there lived a bard. Well, a man who thought himself one. Though he had many a tale to tell, he could find no soul to heed them. As time passed, he became desperate, speaking to himself, muttering the stories that no one would hear. For a while, this appeased him. But the pit of loneliness within him grew deeper.
You know, I've always appreciated the artistic output of Ukraine, especially their metal bands. You've got Nocturnal Mortem, Hate Forest, others. Ukraine has also put out a handful of really innovative and original games that have seen a fair deal of success, like the Stalker and Metro series. Games with irradiated creatures, Eastern European folklore, bleak stories, and eerie atmospheres. Another game that could fit snugly between those two is 2009's Cryostasis: Sleep of Reason. Now defunct studio Action Forms released their first-person survival horror game unceremoniously to mixed reviews from critics, calling it out for its many performance issues and its puzzling storyline. But what do these guys know? They're probably just educated and qualified to make that assessment. But I've been published as well in newspapers and other periodicals. Well, stuff I've done that they don't often mention me in them. Believe it or not, Cryostasis was, like the overwhelming screams of disembodied voices, one of many motivations I had for making these videos. It's one of those games that can incite a great deal of discussion and speculation. I think to talk about it, it's necessary for me to sort of condense my opinion on the concept of story in a video game, because it's a thing that I often forget divides a lot of people. Obviously, based on the games I elect to talk about, I value storytelling a great deal. And if a game can dig inside the gaping void within me and sift out an emotional or intellectual response, then all the better. For a lot of people, a game's story is just the thing you hopelessly try to mash buttons to escape from so you can get back to the game. And admittedly, I often favor a game's plot over its functionality as a game, as in a thing with rules and goals. This is why I'm open to games that are labeled as walking simulators or non-games. I'm a fan of storytelling, and I think video games have time and time again proven to be an excellent platform for storytelling. This is not to say I don't appreciate gameplay or game feel. It's more that I believe games can independently exist with varying degrees of gameplay and story, and I'm always going to find games with interesting stories and memorable characters more notable. A game's story is what's going to stick with me. I'm going to remember the story. That's just how my brain works. But to be fair, it also craves attention and human interaction while simultaneously despising it, so take that with a grain of salt. You get what I'm saying, don't you? I hope you do. You don't get it, do you? You hate me. You think I'm a fool. You think— Right. Well, in the case of Cryostasis, you have a game that story is dense with literary references, politics, mythology, and for a while, you're left in the dark as to what kind of story this is going to be. By the end, you may still feel left in the dark. The game's subtitle, Sleep of Reason, is of course a reference to an etching by Francisco Goya titled The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. So before you even play the game that probably looks like a shooter with monsters, you can expect some artistic analysis of political etchings from 18th century Spain. And once you start up Cryostasis, well, first there is a rather poignant quote from Swiss poet Hermann Hesse, but after that, you're not treated to an introduction of your character or a brief explanation of your circumstances or goals. You are instead given a dramatic reading of The Flaming Heart of Danko, a folktale by Russian author and social realist Maxim Gorky. So already you've been handed 3 pieces of history to rattle around in your brain and try to apply to the story and discern why you've been given them. Once we're given control of the protagonist, we are quickly introduced to an ability called Mental Echo, which is our main source of exposition. Using this ability, we can go back in time and either observe events from the past or in some cases, fully affect their outcome by changing the course of history. Our first use of this reveals that we are in control of a Russian meteorologist named Alexander Nestorov. In 1981, he has finished a tour of duty as a research assistant somewhere near the North Pole, and was given a set of coordinates to hitch a ride on a nuclear icebreaker called the Northwind. Though he does find this ship, it's clearly been shipwrecked and its crew dead for many years. Well, most of the crew is dead. Some of them have come back as ice-covered zombies. Sounds like my ex, fellas, am I right? right? Because I froze her in a block of ice. And others have gone through more bizarre transformations that seem to reflect their status or ranking on the Northwind. Alex begins to explore the massive icebreaker, and using his abilities, he changes the fate of the frozen crew, taking control of them in the past and preventing their deaths. He also starts to learn about the power play and backstabbing that led to the crew's demise. What's unexpected is that while some of these flashbacks are what you'd expect, the crew struggling to hold the ship together, fending off mutated crew members, there is a bigger emphasis on the sort of quiet, everyday moments of the ship's history leading up to the chaos that would consume it. You see clearly the divide building between the ship's captain and his first officer, one operating on faith and experience, and other operating on reason and technology. You see the crew being mistreated and left to slowly starve or freeze while higher-ranking crew sleep comfortably in warm beds. There is a reserved, art house film approach to revealing this game's real story. A story that can boil down to a small and tragic act that spirals outward, dooming dozens of people to die. It's just housed in a supernatural thriller, with a folktale acting as a frame around that. At a certain point, it all seems to coalesce, and you see the parallels between the Danko story and the Northwind story, and that whole narrative is really well done. I feel like I understand that part, and its emotional beats really well. Having said that, there are a number of plot elements separate from that I couldn't hope to explain, and I like to think it's because they are intentionally left to interpretation and not because I'm as stupid as I think I am. I don't actually know why Alexander was sent to a ship despite it being shipwrecked for decades. I don't know who the scary ghost man that shows up every now and then is. I don't know what all the Earth symbolism is about. I don't even know why there's monsters. I'm pretty sure they explained it to me at some point, but I'm just stupid. Because the parallel with Danko's story is that once people are consumed by fear, they sacrifice their humanity and become something monstrous. They become bound to their anxiety and mistrust and abandon reason. The sleep of reason produces monsters. But like, why are they monsters for real? Is this game positing that the world in Danko's story is real? And we are in that world? Because I'm pretty sure that was just supposed to be like an allegory or something. That can't be the explanation for why we are actually fighting real monsters. I don't know, but I kinda like that. It's been 8 years and I'm still plagued with questions. I certainly think there are flaws to the story, and the ending casually rolls out some absurd, perplexing turns, but the story they got right was the emotional one. Cryostasis has an everything and the kitchen sink approach to its story. It's filled with a ton of ideas and inspirations, and even though a couple of these are outliers, a lot of these ideas work and feel creative and original. It's not easy, it's not accessible, it's slow, it's vague, it's confusing, and I love that a video game can tell this story. I almost feel like the monsters are there to keep things exciting, otherwise it's just a story about a man's broken spirit and some people freezing to death, and I'd prefer to experience something that is unlike my own experiences. Cryostasis... Please call me back. So Cryostasis is of course a first-person game, but I don't feel it would be accurate to think of this game as a first-person shooter. Either it's me being pretentious and thinking that the term FPS is somehow derogatory or restrictive, or it's just that it's not the best way to describe this game that is first-person and does most certainly involve shooting. I think this stems from the fact that the combat seems so ancillary. This is not to say it isn't well done, but what I appreciate about this game's approach to combat is that it's appropriately clumsy. This is a game that takes place in a claustrophobic ship, and you are an unbattle-hardened meteorologist trying to defend himself. This creates a very visceral and threatening feeling when you are confronted by enemies. Melee attacks need to be timed impeccably or you leave yourself open. This is even more true when using the fire axe. Though it is certainly more effective, Alex's slow swing feels weighty and cumbersome, and even requires a moment of recovery. Guns are, if anything, more frustrating, but again in an understandable way. The tight confines of a ship are not ideal for a shootout, especially with the majority of your weapons being built for distance. There is a stripped down, minimal quality to guns that I don't often see in shooters. They feel imperfect and slow, especially bolt action ones. with their agonizing reload time. Some are better than others, but most feel slow, and the faster ones have so much recoil that you rarely feel like you're actually hitting anything. Because of this, fights often retain an intensity when stripped of that expected level of security that comes with having a gun. One of many inventive aspects of this game is how your life points work. Unlike most games, which would represent health by the classic red bar that decreases as you take damage, Cryostasis is all about keeping your body temperature up. So your core temperature acts as your health bar, and that can be refilled by warming yourself around fires, lamps, and other heat sources. This also fills your stamina bar, which can be used to slightly increase your movement speed for an imperceptibly brief amount of time, or sprint, as they refer to it. Of course, heat acting as health makes little sense when you can get shot and then heal yourself by getting warmer. But if that's the sort of logical leap that bothers you, you're going to have much bigger problems enjoying this game. When you get shot, instead of the expected blood effects or pulsating red borders, there is a cracked ice decal that appears on your screen as you take damage. Enemies don't bleed either. Instead, your hits create a sort of scintillating burn mark. This further emphasizes the motif of heat meaning life and cold meaning death, and adds to the speculation that Nesterov exists in some kind of afterlife or limbo that follows different rules. I think that when I die, I'll get to wander endlessly through the world, unable to connect with anyone, feeling invisible and distant despite being surrounded by people. The familiarity of it would make for an easy transition. When Nesterov enters the bodies of the fallen crew, we are given a break from the combat, and instead put in these short trial and error based vignettes, where there isn't a risk of dying because we can just jump back into the guy's body. These sequences can vary in significance from altering time so a helicopter doesn't crash, blocking access to a certain wing of the ship, to preventing some bored crew members from killing a polar bear, and even that reveals a new path. These sequences provide many memorable set pieces that stayed with me after I had completed Cryostasis. There's a part where you are silently floating on a little raft in a flooded segment of the ship with only a squeaky little lantern to light your way, and the transformed crew is trying to drag you into the water, so you gotta whack them off. Jerk them. There's another where you find yourself in a small theater that the higher ranking crew used for entertainment, and you start up an old reel of film that shows monsters shooting at you, but they are actually shooting at you in real time, and you engage in a shootout with them even though they exist in a projected image. That's a lot of fun. These are fun, interesting ideas. The most bittersweet aspect of Cryostasis is its gameplay, because it is absolutely frustrating and sluggish, but it's supposed to be, and part of me enjoys how appropriate that feels, but I know that will immediately turn off a lot of people who don't like feeling like they're not in control of something they usually feel capable of. This comes down to preference, but I wouldn't consider it a flaw. I would consider the game's reliance on trial and error and the fact that you can just round a corner and be served a one-hit kill genuinely bothersome. I'm also not fond of the game's willingness to fill you up on ammo for often ineffective weapons. There were many occasions when it just felt easier to use a melee weapon. This is something that I think Condemned got right, where you're mostly using found objects to defend yourself, and on the rare occasion you find a gun or ammo for a gun, it feels important. It feels like a valuable resource that needs conserving. I can't remember a single time where I felt relieved to find ammo, or worried that my supplies were running low, because they steadily feed it to you through enemy drops, and most of it's just lying around. I want to tear pipes off walls and make torches and improvise weapons, which is the direction it felt like it was going in the first hour or so of playing. Alexander puts his hand through a padlock to make some kind of improvised brass knuckles, then you upgrade to a valve wheel thing. Both things I've never even considered using to hit people with, and I've considered a lot of everyday items as potential weapons. Oh shit! God dang it. Cryostasis was a game that was graphically intimidating. I even upgraded my PC in hopes that I could run it. This was in part due to an impressive tech demo showing off the game's engine, and displaying what they claimed to be the first use of NVIDIA PhysX real-time water physics, which you can see in this video. I actually replayed this game twice. The first replay I did without realizing that I could have downloaded a patch from NVIDIA that was meant to activate the advanced physics and add a number of visual bells and whistles. So I essentially already made this video, and then I had to play through it again with the patch and rewrite parts to compensate for my own idiocy. Having played through both with patch and without, I can say that the tech demo is still not entirely indicative of how the game actually looks and performs. The water physics, from some angles, I think look impressive. I can't tell. It's such a strange halfway point between looking impressive and looking outdated. At some angles, it looks effective, and at others, it looks like the big cartoony water drops from the N64 era. It also doesn't help that it looks like either the frame rate drops whenever I'm looking at water, or the animation of the water is at a different frame rate. I don't know, something weird is going on with it, that's for sure. The particle effects like sparks and little bits of ice look great, but I definitely notice a dip in performance when there's too much going on at once. Despite looking generally great, it was very hard to find someone that had a full playthrough without crashes or frame rate loss. It's a graphically demanding game that was not built to accept or take advantage of PCs with multiple CPU cores. It's almost like it was made specifically for a certain type of PC that nobody had. Even I experienced a number of difficulties and crashes which were usually followed by a very Russian sounding prompt. Probably your video hardware has no enough video memory. Try to set less textures quality. It's a shame that it's marred with so many technical issues because it's still a rather wonderful looking game. Environments are covered in a thick layer of glittery ice, and when you turn on a heater or a generator, it begins to liquefy and drip down the walls. There is an unassuming sophistication to little visuals you'll come across, like a hull door being blown open by the Arctic winds outside, opening and closing and making the hallway dark and then light again, with little bits of snow flying through. Enemy designs are really creative, and some of them are legitimately unnerving. I can't quite put my finger on it. Take this spider enemy for example. It's conceptually not very frightening. I mean, it's a guy with his legs pulled up, being suspended by makeshift spider legs, but there is something about the way it moves and the sounds it makes that are really effective. My favorite has to be the prisoner enemies. The first time you see one, it enters the room and you see from its perspective, and it's like zooming out of a prison cell past a gate. And then once you take a closer look at it, you realize that you saw that because his face is literally a prison cell. Like where his eyes are is a tiny diorama of a prison cell. And when he's walking around, there's a light that emits from his face that casts the grid-like shadow of the cell door, and that light flickers out when they die. This did not need to be this imaginative, but I love it. The trade-off is that the human characters you interact with and see in cutscenes look really stiff and don't have very emotive faces. Obviously, you're not really going to get a lot of visual variety being confined to a ship the whole time, but the amount of visuals they are able to pack in here is impressive. Everything is full of detail, and it's clear that a lot of thought went into the look and the realistic layout of the Northwind. Aside from the Russian song at the end, there is really no music in this game, but it's something I barely even noticed because of how fantastic the sound design is. Every moment of this game looks and sounds freezing. Fuck! From the echoing crunch of your footsteps and frozen bulkheads, and the cracking and whining that comes with pushing open a door with icicles frozen around it, every moment there is some subtle thing that adds to the room tone, like the storm outside or a distant generator or water dripping. It's magnifique. It feels fucking lonely, and as a lonely person, I gotta say, you nailed it. I have a lot of love for Cryostasis, and I think it's unfortunate that it didn't get more recognition. As of now, I don't even know where you can buy it aside from a physical copy. A lot of people didn't give it a chance because it's so finicky to get running properly. Not only that, but it's a heavily layered plot that develops at a snail's pace and features intentionally frustrating combat. So it's kind of made from the ground up to turn off your average gamer. The two biggest complaints I came across were either someone couldn't get it running or they thought it was boring. Thankfully, these are things I really appreciate about it. Not the not running good part though. That's a part I can't defend. Yeah, I know it's kind of a tall order nowadays to ask for a game to be complete and functional upon its release, but that's really something that should just be, you know, assumed when something is released as a finished product. So it's a hard thing to recommend. But if you can first find this game, then get it running, you'll find an interesting, if bewildering game with a ton of original and interesting. I used the word interesting twice in a fucking... You'll find a lot of cool ideas, some of which you'll appreciate and some of which will probably confuse you. but it is certainly unlike a lot of games out there. I see reviewers throw around comparisons to BioShock and Dead Space and movies like The Thing. I don't think I agree with those comparisons because it's too much its own personal creation, for better or worse. I can think of things that would have improved my enjoyment of the game, like a fleshed out protagonist, weapon variety, ammo scarcity, but the things I enjoyed far outweigh my criticisms. This is a fantastic looking horror suspense game with time travel and ice zombies, but the core of it is a small tragic character study. You're not handed some huge mind-bending revelation, you're just shown how fragile people can be and how an entire crew can be doomed because of insecurities and arrogance. It's very Russian. If there's anything I've learned from my strange appreciation for Russian folk music, it's that they excel at simple, relatable human tragedy. I really appreciate things that can just bum me out. It's like exhilarating. It's probably why I rewatch my content so often.
One auspicious day, the bard thought to write his stories and scatter them to the wind. Surely they'd find themselves in curious hands. Surely someone would hear other than the four walls of his solitary hearth. This prospect, uncertain as it was, brought him a small measure of joy, and though his melancholy would not relent, for a moment he could dream of its absence.